All right. Welcome, everybody, to the School Board Matters Forum. I am Jenny Newgard. I am the co-lead of the Disability Vote Coalition, which is coordinated by the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities and Disability Rights Wisconsin. And on behalf of the coalition, I'm so happy to see you all here. We are a nonpartisan coalition that works to increase participation of people with disabilities in the voting process and increase access and support for people to understand and assert their voting rights. So this forum today is to help our partners out there understand the importance of local elections, specifically the school board. Many of us will have local elections to vote on April 4th. We encourage you to go to ballotpedia.org or My Vote Wisconsin to check what's on your ballot and give yourself time to research candidates and make your plan to vote. Just a quick note though, information about what's on your ballot will be available starting next week. So if you go there tonight, you're not going to see anything. Now, before we get started, I just want to do a few logistics. We ask that you all please mute to avoid any unnecessary background noise. This program is live captioned. To use the captioning, click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen and then click Show Subtitle, and you can click View Full Transcript to see the full captioning stream. We do have ASL interpreters that are available tonight, Amy and Tracy. If you need help connecting with the interpreter, please use the chat. We will have limited time for questions, but we want to cover what we can. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along, and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end. And as you know, this forum is now being recorded, and we will post this on our website, disabilityvote.org, probably by the end of the week, so you can refer back to this. So now I would like to introduce you to our co-sponsor and moderator of this event. Heather Dubois-Bournon is the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Public Education Network. She is passionate about ensuring public schools are places of joy for all students. She is a proud public school parent, a founding member of Support Sun Prairie Schools and the Sun Prairie Action Resource Coalition, and the co-director of the Spark Local Action Fund. She taught college English and literature and worked in K-12 outreach at UW-Madison before becoming the executive director of the Wisconsin Public Education Network. She's been with the network since 2015. Heather, thank you for being here tonight. I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jenny, and thanks to the panelists for joining us tonight and everyone who is here in real time and who's watching this recording in the future. We are really proud at Wisconsin Public Education Network to be co-sponsoring an event like this, because nothing is more important to our local communities and the outcome of our kids' futures than making sure that we are electing people who really understand what kids need most to serve on our local school boards. I know we are all well aware of that here in this room, but for those who are listening, I think it's just always important to remember that it really is at the school board level that so many important decisions are made about that shape future priorities in our districts. Our school boards decide who's going to run the school board, the district, by hiring administrators. They decide what kind of policies are going to be in place in our classrooms and going to impact the way and what educators teach. They determine what priorities are going to be set when they decide things like mission statements and values and strategic goals. And all of these things are things that are absolutely critical to meeting the needs of all kids. And so it's super important to make sure that we're electing people who represent the diversity of our communities and the broad range of needs that students have. So I was really excited when Jenny reached out and said that she'd put a panel together of people who all have students who have some sort of disability, who are have been inspired to step up and serve, and are here today to help us walk through some of the questions that we all have about how we can just be better at making sure that our kids' needs are being met, and use the power that democracy affords us in running for school board, electing public education champions to our local school boards, and making sure that we're electing people who really understand the needs that all students have when they walk into our buildings, or when we meet them where they are. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourselves at the start of this very first question. And our first question just asks you to tell us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourselves and why you chose to run for a school board seat. And we're going to start with Tara Brzezinski.
Hi, I'm Tara Brzezinski. I in the Neenah Joint School District. I have 3 children. My oldest has disabilities. He is autistic, and we have been in the district since he was 3. So we started our journey there with the IEP process, and just gradually going through the process and learning more things. I know that special education needs a strong voice and a strong advocate. So after I went through the partners in policymaking, I decided that I really wanted to make a difference and advocate more for special education. So I ran last year for a seat, and I was elected. So I am now on the Neenah Joint School District's Board of Education.
And I think I'm next, right? I'm Carla Pennington Cross. I'm a mother of an 11th grader and a 7th grader, Jesse and Nick. I'm in Glendale, so I'm in the Glendale River Hill School District, where I've had kids in that district now for, I think, going on 12 years. I am a Partners in Policymaking graduate, but I never, ever expected to hold any sort of political office. Jesse has had an IEP since 4th grade. Has significant mental health disabilities and labels. I've done a lot of soft advocacy in our district, but last year we had an open seat, and just be honest, a person ran for that seat. There was 2 seats. One was an incumbent running, and then 1 seat was open, and a person threw their hat in, and I was like, I've heard this person say things that are ableist, and I have serious concerns about. So ego, I'm just going to try to fill that seat instead. And so that's kind of what inspired me to run. And then also the second reason that inspired me to run was that our district had cut a lot of social, emotional, and mental health supports during COVID. And I thought that was a huge mistake. And I really wanted to fight for that, to improve that situation. And third, the kicker, we still have students with disabilities who go in a side door at our middle school, and it slays me. And that's going to end very, very soon, or I'm going to start having tantrums. So that's another reason I'm on the school board.
Okay, I think I'm next. Good evening, everyone. My name is Edward Ruffalo, and I live in Appleton, Wisconsin, and member of the Appleton Area School District Board, the 6th largest district in the state. Growing up, I had a brother with Down syndrome. Actually, I grew up in Glendale, so it's nice to hear from a fellow Glendale person. And I've been in Appleton now for 30 years. I have a daughter with disabilities from a traumatic brain injury. I'm also a partner in policy graduate. And after I graduated from that program, I started to look for people to advocate with. And I was a school board member that I got to know pretty well, and often reached out to her with concerns and questions. And then it came up in the paper one day that she was resigning her seat, and there would be an open election coming up. So I reached out to her and I said, thank you for all your service. I'm curious as to who you would think I should talk to next now that you're going to be on the board. And she said, well, why talk to anybody? Why don't you run? So I never really thought about that. And then I did think about it after that. And I said, she's probably right. It's probably time for people that care about students' disability to have a voice on the board. So folks here, I my hat in the ring. Ran into a little bit of a buzzsaw because of COVID, but that's okay. And ultimately got elected, and just pretty soon I'll be starting my third year of my first term.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Swifka. I'm from New London, just on the Outagamie-Wapaka border. My husband and I have lived here for 30 some years. We have a son who's 25 years old now. He was a 2016 grad of New London High School, go Bulldogs. And he has an intellectual disability. I'm also a Partners in Policymaking grad, if I can put a plug in there for the great program. And after that class, it really spurred me to get interested in representing and supporting people with disabilities. I served on the state DPI Special Education Advisory Council for a 3-year term. And then following that, I was appointed to the New London School Board to fill out the term of a person, a school board member that had moved out of the district. So I just served for just shy of 1 year. I feel like my son had a good experience in New London, and I see a lot of cool things happening. But as we all know, there's always room for improvement. And of course, there's never enough money. And so even though I'm not serving on the board anymore, I do continue to stay in touch and pay real close attention to, especially this year's election, because there are some really apparent differences in the candidates that are running this year.
Well, thank you, everyone. I feel honored to be in such esteemed company, and congratulations to all of you on finishing the excellent Partners in Policymaking program. That sounds like an amazing way to introduce people who care about some of these things to all of the ways that they can get involved, raise their voice, and be part of change making that really has an impact on kids. And all of you chose to go the path of serving on your local school boards to make that change. Why do you think that it's important to have school board members, parents who have children with disabilities to serve on our local boards? And let's start with Carla, please.
Thank you. So I thought about this a lot because it feels egotistical to say that I'm important on our school board. But I know that what I bring philosophically is sort of access to lived experience, right? Access to the language of what I bring is sort of a destigmatized view, I guess, right? So every time I sit on the board and I say, my child has a disability in context, I'm helping to destigmatize that conversation around that shame, that ableism that drives a lot of thinking around disability. So I just very baseline, I bring that, and it's very personal to me. And so when I talk about disability, I think the language flows more naturally. And I think that's really different than having people who know about disability from the outside looking in, trying to understand what the challenges are around there. And I think the practical power we bring is obviously around resource allocation, right? So we can be the voice on school boards to talk about SPED funding, to talk about what kind of language and policies our boards should enact. So that's all, without a disability advocate on the board, a lot of that's just going to get naturally overlooked. I meet every month or two with our student services director. We talk about special education, we talk about mental health. And so with me on that board, I know I'm driving her attention to what I care about, which is the PIP model, right? Around self-determination and student voice and destigmatization and inclusion, all these things we talk about in disability advocacy. I just I just pound into her office and we talk. And so I think that access as a disability advocate is really different when you sit on a school board, and it's very powerful. It's a powerful support for our students.
So I think about that first and foremost. Carl is absolutely right. But like for Appleton, there's 20% of the student population has an IEP and has a disability. It's very difficult to run for the school board and be successful just targeting that one group. But when you're a parent with somebody with disabilities, one thing we all learn very quickly is how to deal with large bureaucracies, right? You're dealing with the medical bureaucracy all the time. You're dealing with the government for benefits, and you're dealing with the school system. So you really gain a lot of expertise in how policies are set and how they work well and how they don't work well. And you can really use that experience, not just for people with disabilities, which is very important. Let's be honest, parents with children with disabilities, particularly if they're younger, are generally just exhausted. They really don't have the time to sit at school board meetings, and so much of their time is being advocated, allocated for their child and for dealing with all the different things that you have to deal with. So it's good to have that voice to look out for the students with disabilities, but also that helps you understand, in addition to students with disabilities, you have English language learners, you have students that come from very severe economic disabilities. We have a number of students in our district, even though Appleton is quite affluent, that are homeless. They're living in their car, they're couch surfing, they're going from place to place. And particularly in a district like Appleton, which is pretty affluent, sometimes it's easy to forget about the students that, you know, don't fit the norm or need more help and take more dollars, take more attention. So having somebody on the board to be able to raise your hand and say, look, wait a minute, let's not forget about the non-typical students, let's say. Let's not forget about the students that really need the school districts more than anybody in some ways, so we don't lose sight of that policy. So I feel that particularly parents with students with disability have a lot of experiences that not everybody has, and that can really be a very powerful voice and a very powerful perspective on boards.
Thank you. I'm going to point out to Carla that your quote about lived experiences is right here in my cheat sheet. Um, the I think that if a school board doesn't have a parent of a child with disabilities on the school board, they don't know squat about special education. Case in point, I just had dinner recently with a woman who I served on the board with. She was a long timer, probably 10 or 12 years, if I'm not mistaken. Grew up in the district, went to school in the district, and now her grandchildren are going to school there. She currently has an 8-year-old grandson who has an intellectual or a disability related to a brain injury. And she said, I never knew what an IEP was till he started school. You know, so just that basic information. Anybody who runs for school board is coming into it with their passions and maybe an agenda, whether that's good or bad. It doesn't matter, but we're competing with all of those other interests. We've got people who come in because they come into a board because they think there should be more money spent on STEM education or the music program or getting students involved in going into the trades. And I don't disagree with any of that, but I'm gonna, be the first one to throw out the quote that we learned about in partisan policymaking, which was, if you're not at the table, you might be on the table.
So I'm going to echo a lot what everyone else said. For myself personally, I just wanted to be that voice. Our board had never had someone that was all of our special education students, they needed a voice. And so I am that voice. And I felt that was super important because all the other board members have everything that they're allocating for, and that's all important, but so are our kids. Our kids are so important. And I wanted people to know that they are human beings and that they can do anything that they want to do. They might need a little bit of accommodations, but they can do it. I wanted to make sure that they were included in things. I wanted to make sure that they were seen as a person and not by their disability. That is so important to me. And I, you know, advocating everything else, that I had all these things that I wanted to say, but you guys have all done really good on it. So, but being that parent, it is exhausting. And we also can express that to the board is that, and relate it to our teachers, our special ed teachers, our paraprofessional teachers. They are exhausted too. It's a different type of exhaustion, but they're exhausted. They want to help our kids, but they don't have the means to do it. There's not enough bodies to go around. So to be able to give that perspective to the board and say, what can we do for these people? What can we do for these teachers? What can we do to help them? Because it's not just a regular classroom. They need more attention. They need more help. They need maybe 2 people in there versus the 1. So just giving them that perspective is good because they don't know it. They're not there. They're not in the classrooms. They're not there living it. So being able to give that to them. Same with our resource officers. We do have some EBD kids, right? And just because they have that label doesn't define them, and they may have things going on in their life that we don't know about. So just being able to make someone look at it a little bit different and say, that officer might just be really helpful to them. That might be someone that they can mentor. That might be someone that they can look up to because they don't have that in their life. So just being able to have someone look at it from a different lens than what they're used to, I feel has been really beneficial.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about how that can be beneficial. Having that lens, being that voice in decision-making gives school board members who really understand the needs of students with disabilities a great position to make those concerns known to the rest of the board and to kind of leave with a vision that serves all students. But what kind of decisions have you found in your experience that school boards are making that impact students with the disabilities? And specifically in the district that you serve, what decisions have you seen your board make that have impacted students with disabilities?
You're starting with me. There's an amazing number of policies that come before the board that it's good to have somebody on the board with, as a parent and related to that, the needs of students with disabilities, just to look at those policies from that perspective. I can think of 3 that I was very happy to be on the board because they're very impactful, and I was able to add that perspective. We had our superintendent retired a year into the boards. We hired a new superintendent, and that's a very important, probably the most important thing a school board does is hiring the superintendent. They're really the CEO and leader of the school board, and will have an enormous impact the whole time that they're there. And it was so great as we were interviewing and preparing the interview questions and doing the analysis to make sure that there were questions in there to talk about with prospective candidates. What are your plans for students with disabilities? How are you going to address that? We have 19% of our students in this population. It's underfunded in the state of Wisconsin. We have to spend $23 million a year out of the general fund that we really shouldn't have to. So how are we going to deal with all that? So hiring the superintendent, seclusion and restraints is really a hot button issue to me. And the people on the board will get to know you as kind of the person for people with disabilities and people English language. So lots of times when agenda items come up, they'll even look to you and say, well, what's your perspective on that, Ed? We're really interested in what's your view, and seclusion and restraint was a big one, and really trying to advocate for, the only number that's really acceptable was 0. 109, going from 125 to 109 sounds like progress, but it's 109 too many. And then we talked a little bit about just the SROs and really talking to them about oftentimes out of school suspensions and referrals to the SRO happen very disproportionately for your students with disabilities. So, redoing the 5-year contract, again, a wonderful opportunity for really talking to the lieutenant from the police department that is in charge of that. What is your approach? What is the training for these officers so that they understand when they walk into an EBDB room that's, you may have a different expectation of when you're going to restrain somebody, when you're going to write a citation. So it just is never ending. That's why I really encourage people to either run themselves or be aware of who's running, because every single meeting, it seems like there is a policy or a discussion that needs that perspective of the person with disabilities.
All right. Well, because my time on the board was fairly short, I didn't have the same opportunities for these experiences that some of the other panelists are sharing tonight. But I have stayed in contact with a few faculty and some administrators. And of course, if you've been around the block a few times, you know that it's always going to be about the budget. There's never enough money. There's never enough in the district budget for special ed, and there's never enough money from the state legislature or the federal government. It's never been there. And so we already start out at a disadvantage. So there's all sorts of give and take that needs to happen. So I was talking to the director of pupil services recently, and she said, we need speech and language pathologists like crazy, but we're gonna drop an English teacher. English teachers, we're good. It's not to say that English isn't an important part of the curriculum, but they're having to make these choices that may not be provide the best outcome for everybody. So. And in addition to the budget, then there are issues like transportation. We have a small, our district is fairly small enrollment wise, but we're very long and narrow. And so there are 2 buses that have wheelchair access. So they're going north and south, and sometimes kids have a really long drive, and that's not the best circumstance. We have declining enrollment overall, but there are an increasing number of students that the district has seen that have disabilities or medical conditions that warrant a 504 or an IEP. The last thing I heard is that for the last number of years, although open enrollment is available for kids without disabilities, they close open enrollment for kids with disabilities because the people resources aren't there. The last thing I'll mention is that we tend to think a lot about how important the faculty are, the teachers are, but the other professional support staff have a real important role in supporting students with disabilities. So RNs, social workers, speech and language folks, counselors. And in our district, all of those folks came to the board a couple of weeks ago and they asked for a raise. And so it remains to see what's going to happen this year. I'm curious.
For me in our district, of course, like everyone else, budgets are super important. For me, the budget, I took a little bit a different approach because many people don't understand that so of course, in Wisconsin, we don't get reimbursed 100% for special education. And many don't understand that the federal has, federal IDEA law has to provide that. And so I went out and did my own research on the average amount that each district is pulling from general education fund, to 10% or higher in a lot of districts. And so making those parents aware that don't have special education students know that they're affected as well. And that, it has to come from somewhere. So that money's coming out of general education fund to go into special education. So they're going to lose that funding too. And to really drive home to families that just because you don't have a special education child in the district doesn't mean that your child isn't going to be affected by these budget shortcomings. So that's been a huge thing that I've been pushing, just to make sure everyone understands and shows that, yes, I am the voice for them, but I'm also the voice for everybody else, because we have to fund them 100%. The other thing too is we just recently did our SRO renewal for the district, and we renegotiated things, and I really explained to people, because we also are building a new high school, and so we'll be going into another police department, and just explaining the importance of a CIT officer. Also having someone that is more in the social worker field that can de-escalate some of these kids. And really having that importance that it can't just be a normal officer that comes over there. If we need a de-escalation or someone's eloping, it really needs to be someone that is crisis trained, that can help de-escalate properly, that can really help that student that's in crisis, and not just, we're not going to handcuff them. We're not going to restrain them. We're not going to traumatize them. We are really going to just de-escalate them and help them, because that's really important. And it actually ended up being one of the main topics that we put in our contract, is to ensure that all the officers are CIT trained, because it's really important that we have that difference. So.
I don't have a ton to add. I'm finishing out my first year on a 3-year term on the school board. And I only just learned this year, when open enrollment came up, that we calculate open enrollment for students with IEPs separately from open enrollment for students without IEPs. So that was news to me. So that's kind of on my radar for the coming years, to see if we are, because there's a cyclic quality to it. If we have enough special ed staff, we don't have to differentiate as much, and we can not discriminate against students who have IEPs in making open enrollment decisions. The only reason we would have to discriminate and separate that pool is if we don't have enough staff, right? So that's a big, deep conversation I think our district needs to have. And so that's obviously something that we're going to have to do as a board. What I found in my experience in the past year, in terms of my role as a disability advocate and voice on the school board, is that in the equity work we do, I'm able to bring that conversation and wrap it back to people with disabilities. Our district is 60% people of color. We have significant race issues, but in the conversation about educational equity, most of on this call know that people with disabilities are among the most marginalized cohorts in our schools and in our communities. And so when we talk about universal educational equity in my community, it's really easy to talk about the most present, most obvious aspect of disparity, because there's huge achievement gaps in our school district, but people with disabilities need to be at the table and need to be taken into consideration as we build our equity policy and lean in on our equity work. So I think our board has important work to do around that. We can't drive the nuts and bolts, but we have the power to set policy, and through sort of transparent questioning and dialogue in board meetings, we can hold our schools to accountability for the work we ask them to do. And so, I try to understand the limits of what I can do as a board member. I can't march into the schools and say, do this, do that today with this student, make this bus park over here instead of there. But I can, in board meetings and in conversations with administrators and community members, ask for awareness of these issues and just hold people to account if they're making what I think are bad decisions.
Thanks, Carla. You all have given us some really wonderful examples of all of the ways that school board members can be part of decision-making that has a huge impact on policy and the advocacy focus of your local district. But let's talk a little bit more about what Carla just started to tap into, which is how do we get the change we seek if we want to march in and make it happen? Because I know there are a lot of parent advocates out here who might not be ready to step up and run for school board themselves, but are ready to start change making however they can. I'd love to hear from each of you on what you have seen as some of the best ways for parents to work with their school board to influence that decision making that affects their children and others who have disabilities. And
Well,
I think we're starting with Mary this time.
Alrighty, thanks. And I just want to put out a reminder that we're all on the same team, right? Being an advocate for your child can be frustrating at times, but I think, barging into somebody's office or, going into an open forum at a school board meeting with an axe to grind is the least effective. That being from a person who's been known to shoot off her mouth sometimes. But I do think that going to a school board meeting and speaking at the open forum provides you with an opportunity to speak one time to lots of different players. So you're not just talking to the board, you're talking to the administrators that are there, you're talking to other people in the audience who may be teachers or other parents or students. But you're just not going to get a response during that meeting. You're going to need to follow up. And so I guess my other point that I think is more valuable in the long run is to find a champion on the board. And if I were in Glendale, I'd go to Carla. But if I don't know, my board members very well, just pick up the phone, send them an email. Explain your issue. What are your concerns? Ask them direct questions. What can you do to help? Or how can we work together to make changes or whatever? So I'll hold it at that.
I'll echo a lot what Mary said. I had a lot of those points on here. Open communication is key. Being transparent, that's another great thing, is everyone should be very transparent with each other. Everyone should be on the same page and know that you are all on the same team. I always say to my parents that I help do IEPs in other districts, not mine. But I always say, go into the meeting with an open mind. Same with going into a board meeting with an open mind. You may leave with your mind switched to the other side that you didn't think you were going to, or you might leave with more information than you thought you were going to have. And just be respectful. I always say that to everyone: be respectful, be kind. Another thing too in our community, which has been a huge problem, is transparency. A lot of our community members don't think that we're being transparent. So just explaining how the open forum works, having them understand that once you say what you need to, we're not going to be able to communicate back and forth. A lot of people think that if they ask a question, they're going to get an immediate response, and that doesn't happen. So they get frustrated by that, right? And that makes them upset and that we're not listening. So what we've actually done in our meetings now is we put in each of the agenda, we actually put the explanation of it. We say you get this much time ahead of time for the open forum. We're not going to be able to discuss this information, but if you have questions, you can always email. So that gives them an idea of what that open forum is. We also put in there, because a lot of people say, well, why can't we talk about that? Well, we can't talk about anything unless it's on the agenda. So those are just really good things, is just to be open with your community, let them know how the process works, because then you're being transparent with them and you are explaining things to them, which I think then opens up the door they don't feel like anyone's hiding anything.
So I've been on both sides of the table, as I think all of us who are on this school board panel have been. But I would say that now that I'm on the board, I see more clearly that school board members simply have very little play in day-to-day decision-making in schoolhouses. So putting a parent or caregiver hat on, I would say that if you have a very specific concern, this is my advice to caregivers, about something that's happening with your child, the school board might not be the best place to go, because you're going to be flipped back through the chain of command to the teachers and administrators in your schoolhouse who need to have their hands in that. And if you think you're going to end up in a complaint and you've communicated a lot with a school board member who you think is an ally, that ally might have to recuse themselves from decision making should you have a complaint that comes through and that policy requires a board to make a school decision on. So you may be reaching out to an ally and shooting yourself in a foot if you think you have a very challenging situation that might end up in a formal complaint of some kind. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind. I have a network of friends. We often call each other, like, talk me down. I'm really upset. I'm getting ready to start placing some calls. Talk me down, because we want to hold on to those allies on our school boards so that they can stay engaged impartially in decision making. I would say that if you want to influence board decisions, you should see your story as part of your advocacy tools, right? I would encourage you to attend board meetings and speak during visitor participation. I would encourage you to invite board members to sit down with you, as Mary has suggested, have coffee, get together, get to know each other. That's one of the strongest tools in advocacy. And as you think about what to talk with a board member about, I think one of the best mindsets to bring is what will serve the district broadly, not just your student, but the district broadly. And then the story of your children or your child is that illustration of what's going to be best for the district. And it's hard when we're engaged in that exhausting journey as parents to come to a board member, and our children have so many needs, and sometimes they're hurting so bad and they need so much. It's important to remember that school board members are seeing this hurting often more than celebration from broad swaths of community with people with a lot of different needs. And so, we're looking for justification to help people who reach out to us. And that often has to be from a broader mindset, because we're trying not to embed ourselves into those individual decisions and disadvantage families. So that's what I have to offer.
So there's a number of ways that I would encourage people to consider. I was first elected right into the midst of all the COVID controversy. So at first I thought it was perfectly natural to be getting 100 to 200 emails a day. But the truth is that's not natural. That's not the typical. Just as something as easy as sitting down and drafting an email, I don't get that many in a week. So each one that I get now, I'm more than happy to pay a lot of attention to. And it's a great way to communicate with board members. We also have something in our district, which I help champion, called Community Conversations. And every 6 weeks, board members outside of the public comment, because that is so restricted by Wisconsin open meeting laws, people can come in and talk to us about any topic they like. It's been really well received, but maybe not as much attended as we might like. So it's great if the parents with disabilities have come, but would love to hear from more. And we talked a little bit about if you can find a champion on the board, and there'd be some obvious ones, me and Appleton, Tara, probably Nina, that you can, if you have those concerns, there's nothing at all wrong with reaching out to them directly. If you want to get together face to face, most board members are delighted to do that and start. That's what I did. That's how I actually got on the board or interested in the board, was developing more of a one-on-one relationship with a board member that you can reach out to. And now, to earlier points, board members do not really have the ability to step in and solve individual problems. That's really up to local building administration. But it sure is great to hear from people about general policy concerns. This is working, this isn't working. Here's something I heard even tonight. Tara asked about, insisted that, in fact, that they added a CIT clause to the SRO contract. Darn, I wish I had thought of that. So next time that comes up, our memorandum of understanding, I would bring that up. So those are great things. Board members don't know everything. So you have a good idea, you have a thought, please share that with us. And then finally, if you have a bit more time, but not enough time to be on the board, I think somebody even put this in the comments section. Don't forget about the PTOs. They also have a lot of influence, particularly at the local building administration. So I encourage advocacy in any one of those ways, but particularly just email and one-on-one outreach to board members.
Those were some really fantastic tips. I found myself taking notes because they were all so valuable. And I think you all have done a great job of giving examples of how parents can kind of strike a balance between being a district's cheerleader and being a district's critical friend, celebrate the things that are working and look for ways to raise your voice. I loved all of the emphasis you all put on learning how your district does things. That's so important. And as board members, you have had lots of opportunities to see how change gets made. And we'd love for you to share an example with us of, since your own time on the board, how your personal presence has positively impacted policies, especially for children with disabilities. What's an example you can share with us that you've had of a challenge that you've had to overcome to make that change happen?
So in our district, so as a board member, you are on committees as well. So you break up everything into committees, which a lot of people don't understand. They don't see behind the scenes. So they see us just as board members, but we also have committees that we sit on too. I'm on a legislative committee, so we hear all of the legislative things that come in. And every year we go through WASB. So that is the Wisconsin Association of School Board. And it's a very thick book. And we go through it and see if there's anything in there that we want to change, anything in there that we want to add to. And so one of the things in there that myself and another partner, we actually kind of went together on this one. She's from another district, but we had some language removed, and it was the word handicap. So it had been in there since 1970 or 1983, a very long time ago. So they needed to update that wording. And then they also needed to update what consists of an IEP team. So we were able to successfully have that removed and changed. So that's a great move forward. And I'm super happy that I was a part of that.
My most recent example, I found myself thinking about, we're doing a massive policy review for every board policy that we have. So, and it's, oh my gosh, it's painful. But so at every step, I put on my equity and disability cap and try to root out whatever language is stuck in there. But most recently, we were brought a set of wellness policies around nutrition and student health. And it was strange. It was some sort of WASB template, but it referred to basically, and I'm paraphrasing, student wellness, obesity, and nutrition. And, every red flag went off in my head. Why are we highlighting obesity as the single health challenge that our youth face? And I thought about my daughter who takes medications that cause her to gain weight. This is not a health problem that deserves to be highlighted in our policy, on student wellness. What about mental health? What about, when I kind of went crazy in my mind, and I brought it to the school board. I said, if you look at what most experts say are the three main things that support student health, human health, it's going to be nutrition, rest, and exercise, not obesity. If you look at the two leading causes of death in youth, it's accidents and suicide, not obesity. I don't know why we would single out this one stigmatized issue. It rolled into equity. It rolled into this question of whether it's an artifact of other mental health or disability challenges kids have. And I felt it was just an incredibly harmful, fat phobic, kind of hateful bit of language. We were on a first reading, which means it's that mostly first readings on our school board just rush through. They say, yes, these policies are fine, we'll edit them. And I said, I don't even want to approve a first reading. I don't want us to say, yes, let's move forward with a policy that on its face has some hate and stigma built into it. And I won. I was very excited. We sent it back. We said, do better. Write a policy that meaningfully expresses what we say are our equity values in this community, including seeing our children as human beings and not as labels. And so it felt really, really good.
So this isn't done, it's a work in progress. I'm on the committee that created the community linkages policy for the Appleton Area School District. And over the last year, we've had several meetings with stakeholders, mostly community members. We're going to also do teachers and students. But one of the things that has come out of that is there's still a lot of questions, concern over the IEP process within Appleton, and some frustrations, some things that maybe are going well, some things that maybe need to be addressed. So as we complete our first year of that, one thing I'm contemplating advocating for is to create a focus group just of parents of students with disabilities to sit down and talk about the IE process. So take it away from the individual, I'm having my IEP meeting, but instead really look at the overall process. And as my wife and I often say, and other parents, if you haven't had a bad IEP, you just haven't had enough IEPs. So there always seems to be something that doesn't quite go right. Somebody isn't ready, people don't show up, on and on and on. And it's much more frustrating to some of the families out there than I think the board or the administration really realizes. So I think doing a focus group on that might really open some eyes, and we'll learn some things that we can then follow forward on. So haven't done it yet, but it's something that I'm really excited to get done.
Again, because of my short duration on the board, I really don't have a story to share. But I will say that I have been paying close attention to the elections the last couple of years. And what I discovered was that last year there was no increase in the special education budget. It was flat. And this year, there's some concern among some folks that it might be the same, or there might even be a cut. There are people on the board who love nothing more than to slash the special ed budget. I have no idea why, but I guess, what I'm doing is that in lieu of having a role on the board, I see myself more as the outside agitator. I mean, to let people know that I see what you're doing, I see what you're thinking. Can we do this a better way? Yeah, I was going to say one other thing, but really it's not relevant to this question right now. So I'll just wrap that up there.
Well, thank you for sharing those examples of how powerfully you've been able to impact your own districts and your larger communities. Let's close up the formal part of this conversation by just sharing a little bit more on why you think school board races really matter, especially for people who don't have children in our schools right now. Let's just go around and share what do you think is the most important thing at stake in voting for school board in your spring elections? I think we're starting with Carla this time.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was sitting here trying to figure out if it was me. I tend to have the view that our public schools are fundamental to the success of our nation. It's that basic. And when we vote for school board members, we're voting for how our students, our kids are going to be shaped into the adults who run our nation and our states and our government. And so who we pick, the moral compass, the civic compass of the people we put on our school boards is going to help drive that moral compass of the next generation of leaders in our nation. And access to education is part of our moral compass, right? Access to high quality education, access to a schoolhouse where you're held to high expectations, no matter what your abilities or your race or your gender or whatever your labels are, is in my view foundational to success in this country. So to me, it's that simple. You got to vote in school board elections because this is the future of our country. If you want to live, your students, your kids to live in a successful future in a country that doesn't fall apart, we need to build healthy schools. We need to build inclusive and accessible schools, right? And that's the story of our nation, moving closer and closer to inclusion and accessibility. And it feels like the last part of that story has always been and continues to be people with disabilities. And so, you know, if we care about that, I think you need to go out there, get to know your candidates, and pick the candidates who recognize the humanity of every single child in our school districts, and values that. If I were talking to a different audience, though, I admit, I would say the best schools you have are inclusive schools, and you're going to improve achievement gaps, and that's going to lift the value of your property. And the better the value of your property, the lower your tax rate is going to be because there are levy limits. So you want good schools. So, you know, but here I'm telling you what I actually care about, which is, you know, the beating heart of our nation. So that's why you got to vote.
So I'll add to that. That's very well spoken. Schools play just an enormously outsized important role in success for individuals, for our community, for our state, for our nation. We live in an advanced democracy. We need well-educated people. We live in a very complex, advanced economy. You have to have a certain level of education to be able to compete and thrive in our economy. And we can't leave people behind, people with disabilities, English language learners, etc. It's one of the best examples of being penny wise and dollar foolish if we do that, because it's not a question of if we're going to spend money, it's a question of where we're going to spend it. We spend it in schools and help be successful. Those are dollars, are the smallest dollars we're ever going to spend. As far as voting, I always try to remind people, school board is nonpartisan. It's nonpartisan for a reason. It's because it's not supposed to be either a left or a right issue. And I try very hard never to reveal what my political leanings are, because I think it's appropriate on school boards. It's becoming politicized, and that's really unfortunate. So I try to fight against that. Also, remember, turnout is historically very low. So sometimes if you can get out and vote, remember, you're not voting once, you're kind of voting 4 or 5 times, because the turnout's going to be 20 to 25%. I got elected with 7,777 votes out of a district that has 75,000 voters. So turnout can be 20%, 25%. It's usually about it. Might be a little higher this time with the Supreme Court race, but so if you vote, it really makes a big difference. And there's only 7 people often on a school board, sometimes 5, and they have enormous influence on what gets on the agenda and what gets paid attention to and what gets resources. So it is definitely worth your time and energy to learn about that, care about it, and pick candidates that you think are going to reflect your values, whatever those might be.
I'll just wrap up with the fact that I learned recently that, well, I knew already that the school district of New London, population 7,000 people, is the 3rd largest employer in the city of New London. And I also discovered, which was even more remarkable, is that about 80% of all of the employees in the district live in New London. I think I knew the number was high, but I didn't know it was that high. And so I'm looking more at the micro view as opposed to Carla's look at the, you know, the big picture about our students are the future of this country. In our district, our students are the future of our community. They're going to stay here and they're going to work and they're going to raise families and they're going to buy houses and they're going to be consumers and they're going to pay taxes. And how I want to tie in the part about students with disabilities is that they're going to be doing the same thing. If we do this right, the people with disabilities in our community will also be working here and being consumers and buying houses and raising their families and being taxpayers. And the way we treat students with disabilities in our school is a reflection on how we will treat those people with disabilities who are citizens of our city. So I think we need to walk the walk and talk the talk as we're teaching our kids, and that will reflect positively on our community as a whole.
And I'll end it. I always say this expression, you can't complain unless you take action. So you can't complain to your local school board if you didn't vote. And I think it's just so important that people can't just sit behind a screen and complain about something if they're not out there actually doing the work. They're not out there voting. They're not out there, trying to work with their teachers, the students, the administration. I mean, it's all in one. It's all a community. And many of these kids, disability or not, they could be nurses taking care of us if we're sick. They could be teachers themselves teaching, other youth. So these are our kids are our future, and it's important that we make sure that they have a good future. I'll also say that public education is super important to have people's voice in and have the right people on the school board that are going to fight for it, because kids with disabilities, they can't just go to any school. And that is super important that people understand as well, is that there are some people that have the means financially to go to a private school. There are some parents that have the means to maybe stay home, or, those other means. There's other families that don't have those means, and especially kiddos with disabilities, because many of those private schools, those charter schools, they can accommodate them, and they don't have the protections that a private or that a public school has. So it's really important that people remember that too, that if they have kids with disabilities in their school, that we need to make sure that those public schools are good for those kids with disabilities.
What a beautiful note to end on, as our public schools graciously, gratefully serve and welcome all. And we have so many opportunities when we cast our votes in our spring election to make sure that the people who we are selecting to serve us are people who are going to take that challenge seriously and make sure that we are providing as inclusive and wonderful an education we can for every single student who enters our schools. That is a challenge that you all have taken up, and we are grateful for your service and your willingness to turn your passion into policy that works for kids and to help others find their way on that path as well. You've laid out some really wonderful tips for us tonight, and we're excited to think about how we can put those into action. For those of you who are listening and wondering how to make sure you have great people like this to vote for on your ballot, I encourage you to visit myvote.wi.gov so you can check out your spring ballot and see who's on there. Look for sources like the League of Women Voters or other local groups that have done candidate surveys or questionnaires. Look for candidate forums that you can watch or attend. Visit the candidates' Facebook pages or websites and find out more about where they stand on all of these issues. And if you have any questions, ask. You'd be surprised how accessible most candidates are to having honest conversations about things that you may agree or disagree with that you see on their campaign materials. So take any opportunity that you have to be an engaged voter, and then take your own role in amplifying that information seriously, because it's only when we spread the word to others in our community and encourage them to come out and vote with us about the things that matter most, that we are most likely to make sure that we're electing the best champions we can to serve our students in their public schools. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to help facilitate this great conversation today. Thanks to Tracy and Amy for making it more accessible to all of us. And thanks to Tara, Carla, Edward, and Mary for sharing all of their wonderful pro tips and experiences with us today. I think that Jenny is going to lead some Q&A, and I saw that there are some great questions already lined up in the chat.
That's right. We do have some great questions. So if you can hold out with us for a few minutes, and then we have some great resources. But first, I want to thank Heather for doing a beautiful job moderating our panel and including your perspective. What a nice way to wrap up. So let's see what we have for questions. Early on, Mary had asked, and maybe Heather, you can respond to this. Do all the school boards in the state operate under the same set of rules?
Well, I can tackle that one, I guess, from a statewide point of view. And the answer is kind of yes and no. I mean, there are certain statutory parameters that all boards must fill. There are certain things that all the boards have to do. But under that, boards do have quite a bit of leeway in setting their own policy goals, how many people are on their boards and so on, what kind of governance model they follow. And so there is a lot to be learned when you are moved to a new community about, how does open public comment work at this particular board, because that's different around the state. And so being familiar with those parameters is an important part of putting your advocacy hat on when you start to speak up in these forums. And I'm sure if we wanted to go deeper into this, we've learned that there's probably similarities and differences across all of the boards that are represented by the people on our panel here tonight.
Great, thank you. Then Jackie asked, Jackie is with Fox Cities Advocates for Public Education, and that they're struggling with messaging around the 30% really low reimbursement rate for special ed funding, making it necessary to pull from the general ed funds, and the sensitivity around blaming then the special ed kids. But so if there was any advice anybody has about how do you message this talking point? And just an FYI, the Fox Cities Advocacy Group is advocating for 60% reimbursement rates.
So I guess I would fall back to the rules. I mean, you can't argue with rules. Your ideal law, go back to what the ideal law states. It's a federal law that we have to provide for that. I would also fall back to, your state reimburses that. Encourage them to really, during the state budgets, to get involved, encourage them to advocate that way, to have them reimburse more. But at the end of the day, you can't really argue too much with that federal law, but it's not the special education students' fault. We do owe that to them. So that's, I guess, to get that out of the mind, is this isn't a blaming game. I mean, you can't argue with a law. You can't argue with something that is there. They do deserve this. They need that equal playing field, and they do need those accommodations.
Does anybody else want to
I would just build on that. I think Tara's spot on, but also to remind legislators, students with disabilities almost never can open enroll to other schools because of the high cost. Those are usually closed. The private schools, even if there is a voucher program available, is closed to them because they can't provide those services. Generally, they're too expensive. So it is always going to be their home district that has a legal and quite frankly moral obligation to provide those services. And we're already providing the usual and customary coverage for what it would cost to educate a child. We're just looking for help for the additional cost that a special ed student brings. The IDEA Act of 72 or 74, even just as a rough rule of thumb, used double the cost. So it's very hard for even for the taxpayers to necessarily be expected to shoulder all that burden when nobody on the board or the school or anybody has control over where somebody chooses to live. So we take every child that comes to us, and we have to do our very best to educate them.
Thank you, Edward. I think that's very important that people understand that a lot of times that's how we end up going to referendums is schools aren't getting properly reimbursed for those students. So we appreciate your point, Jackie, about, you know, trying to make sure that students with disabilities don't get blamed in their communities. Okay, so we are almost at the end of time here. I'm going to launch a really quick poll. If y'all don't mind just taking a few minutes to fill that out. And while you do that, Barbara, my co-lead at the Disability Vote Coalition, has put some really helpful resources in the chat, including a March 20th lunch and learn on the spring election. It's a really important election, not only because there are local elections such as school boards in many communities, not all, but many, but there are several statewide measures on the ballot that people need to be aware of, including some constitutional amendments. So actually wanting to change Wisconsin's constitution. So that's something we all need to think long and hard about. And then the very important Supreme Court election. So that lunch and learn on the 20th will go into more details about what is a constitutional amendment. What does that mean? How do I find out more about Supreme Court candidates, and as well as we'll talk about like voting rights for people with disabilities and those kinds of things. I also want to be sure that people are aware, because we have been still getting people running into barriers, that as of last August, a federal court did affirm that any Wisconsin voter who needs assistance with mailing or delivering their absentee ballot because of a disability must be permitted to receive that assistance by a person of their choice other than their employer or their union official. So we're still running into things where people are getting, you know, in their uniform instructions when they get their ballot, that it says that you cannot have anyone return your ballot, or somebody delivers it to the clerk and the clerk won't accept it. As of August, you can have somebody assist you if you have a disability. If you run into problems with that, we would really like to know about it. And it would be helpful if you call the DRW voter hotline. Barbara put that number in the chat. It's 844-347-8683. And that's a number you can call anytime you have a voting question. If you are just stuck, you don't know where to go, whatever it is, any kind of disability voting related question, call that number. We're there year round, and we will help you work through whatever issues you might be having. Okay, so I think everybody's going to do the poll that's going to do the poll. So I will take that off. And again, thank you all. It was a wonderful night. We so appreciate hearing all the different perspectives. And again, this is recorded. So if you want to refer back to this, it will be on our website in a few days. Thank you all for your time tonight. Take care.
Great panelists. Thank you so much.